So the why. I think with everything we do, the critical question is why. And so I'd like to start off with a short video that answers that question.
So on the musology videos, when now I'm looking at them and I'm listening, I can use different examples that they talk about and sing on my test. Because at first I was like, oh, I'm failing. I'm not going to be able to do this. Because it wasn't my type of style of music. But then after a couple of days or weeks, I actually got used to it and I liked it. Like, and then I started telling the teacher, I was like, Miss Forehand, I can do this. I can do this. I'm getting 100% on my test, and you seen it on the screen. I was like, who else got this in this class except for me? Not trying to be overconfident. I was just saying I was proud of myself because I've never made 100% in that class before, and I was just so proud of myself. Like I kind of got emotional for a second, and I am now because I'm just seeing myself. I'm just like I'm so proud because I've never felt that feeling before of just getting 100%, 100%, 100% on my test, and I just feel so proud of myself now. So I just want to thank my teacher, and I want to thank Musology and the first lady over there for bringing Musology up and let it go out all through the states or wherever y'all do it at. I just want to thank y'all.
So those were amazing students from Hall High School in Little Rock, Arkansas, taught by the most amazing Shirley Forehand. She's the math department head at Hall High. Shirley's on this ed webinar with us today. So I just wanted to shout out to Shirley, and the reference to the First Lady was the First Lady of Arkansas, Susan Hutchinson, who has been an amazing supporter of the arts and music-based learning and integration in the great state of Arkansas. And when this student says, I had never gotten 100% in this class before, and when I did, I felt so proud of myself. I think as educators, like that's the holy grail, right? Like that's what we're trying to do and achieve. And so I wanted to begin by talking about the power of language and belief, self-fulfilling prophecy, and why what we say matters. Because Shirley will attest to the fact that there were students in her math class, and these were ninth graders, many of whom were at a fifth and sixth grade proficiency level in math. And when we spoke to some of those students, what they said is like, I'm failing this class, I'm bad in math. And this was a very strong internalized belief. And it's not unique to Shirley's classroom. We've seen this in classrooms all over the country, where early on in a learner's education experience, they encounter something. It could be something a teacher said. It could be something a friend said. Sometimes it's something a parent said that leads that learner to believe that they're not good at math. And I remember when we were doing some initial pilot research with summer school students several years ago, when we did some interviews at the beginning of summer school about students' perceptions of themselves, their own learning efficacy. And these were students who had failed eighth grade math, made statements like, I'm dumb, I hate math, I don't care about going to high school and taking algebra, and I'm not going to college. So think about that for a second. A teenager who has internalized, I'm dumb. It's very sad and it's very problematic because what it sets in motion is a self-reinforcing negative feedback loop. And the way that feedback works is once a student internalizes that belief, they stop applying themselves because why should they? Because they're dumb and math is hard. So they don't pay attention in class. They check out. They don't study. They don't do their homework. And so what happens as a result of that? They get a bad grade on their next test, which is confirmatory evidence of their negative belief that they're dumb and math is hard and they're never going to do well at it. And so they're stuck in this spiral. They're stuck in this spiral and it continues until something can stop that spiral and start spinning it around the other way. Well, that's not the easiest thing to do, but it's possible. And so we saw this happen that very summer I was referring to, summer of 2016. We were working with 300 summer school students in Knoxville, Tennessee, a great district with amazing math leadership there. And we saw these students in the course of 4 weeks have that feedback loop stopped and turned around. And it is what that gentleman just said in the video when he, through music-based learning, for the first time, experienced academic success and got 100%, everything changed. Because at first that 100% is disconfirmatory evidence, right? That 100% doesn't fit into a student's worldview of I'm done, math is hard, because they're not supposed to be getting hundreds. So they're like, that's weird. How'd I just get 100? And then they go, let me try this again. And they get another 100 and another 100. And suddenly those kids go, I can do this. I am able to achieve. Maybe math is not so hard. And what we found with these learners is they got addicted to the achievement and success, because the truth is everyone wants to achieve. Everyone wants to succeed. And when these students had a taste of it, everything changed. So, self-fulfilling prophecies, the power of language and belief, why what we say matters, negative and positive reinforcing feedback loops, and as we saw in that beautiful video, the link between self-confidence and achievement. So let's talk about music-based learning. Why music-based learning? So there's a quote I love. It's kind of a derivation of this quote by Edward Deming, and he says, learning is not mandatory, but then again, neither is survival. We're built to learn as human beings. We don't survive if we don't learn, broadly construed, right? And specifically. And so when we hear someone say, like, the student can't learn, of course they can. They're just not being taught in a manner that resonates with them, right? These same students who struggle with learning know the words to every single song they like. These same students who struggle with learning, when there's something they're super passionate about, it could be sports, it could be any type of hobby, they can tell you every single piece of information and stat about their favorite sports teams or athletes. My 9-year-old nephew is super, super, super into technology, and he can look at this iPhone of mine and tell me the names of like all the processing chips inside of it, which is like blows my mind. So when there's something that a learner is interested in and passionate about and fascinated with, they learn. And so what's the secret to memory? Anybody want to take a guess? I can see in the attendee chat some of the comments y'all are saying. What do you think is the reason why we forget names? Anybody have a hunch? Why do we forget names? Too many, no focus. Memory must be meaningful, neural connections. They don't matter, not interesting. Okay, great answers. The reason why we forget names is we're not paying attention. The number one reason is we're not paying attention when we hear them the first time, right? It's not why we forgot them. It's we never really encoded them strongly in our mind. So you know the experience. You meet someone, they introduce you. They introduce themselves to you, they tell you their name, and your mind's somewhere else, or someone said you're not interested, you're like, not really interested. You're not paying attention. The information really doesn't get encoded strongly in the brain, and like literally seconds later, you're like, what was that person's name? I just met them. Attention is the key to memory and retention. Memory and retention does not happen without attention initially. So if students are not paying attention when you're teaching something, they're not going to remember it because it's not going to be encoded strongly in the brain. So in the same way we're talking about, hey, kids know the words to all these songs, or kids know every statistic about their favorite athletes because they're attending to the information, they're interested, they're paying attention. So music-based learning is one of these amazing things that help this attention process. And what neuroscientists have revealed amazingly, and you can see in this graphic here, is that music activates every single brain region critical for successful learning. These are 4 brain regions: attention, we just spoke about that, right? Attention, motivation, memory, emotion. And when we speak to educators about like what are the greatest challenges you face in the classroom today, there's your short list. I mean, it's right there. Now, more so than ever, when we're looking at the reality of continued remote learning, these 4 areas are critical, right? When you're not in the same room as a student and they have a lot of distractions that you can't control, what do you do to capture their attention, which, as we know, is the foundation for any type of learning and retention? What do you do to keep them motivated? How do you undergird memory and support it? And how do you get them emotionally engaged with what you're teaching? And the beauty of music-based learning is it does all of those things. So let's talk about the power of music. We've all experienced the learning power of music. I'd like to talk to you about the ABCs. We think the ABCs is simple, right? Let's unpack the ABCs for a second, because what I would claim is that it's actually a very challenging cognitive task in which the learner is asked to memorize 26 nonsense syllables in perfect order. Now, if I were to ask you all, how many of you think, if I gave you like just 20 pieces of random information, how many of you could memorize it perfectly in order? I think very few of you would say you could do it. Yet, little babies can do this when we set the information to music. And to this day, when we ask adults, what comes first? I'll ask you all right now, what comes first, P or Q? I would venture to guess that many of you are going, elemental P, to answer that question. So like to this day, we still retreat to music to pull back information for something we're very comfortable with, the ABCs, and that we use a lot, and very comfortable with alphabetical order, but still we'll pull back the song to capture the information. That's an example of the power of music. And so what we see in our lives is that information put to music is easy to remember, and it's persistent memory. It's memory that stays with you for a lifetime. Now, repetition is still key. You didn't learn the ABCs after hearing it one time. You heard that ABC song again and again and again. And we all know that repetition is key to any type of learning. So why is music-based learning so special when it comes to repetition? Well, remember that image of the brain, okay? What music also does is it releases neurochemicals that make you feel good. So you are motivated to listen to a song again because physiologically, it feels good. Music actually activates the same neurochemical system as things like eating chocolate. I mean, things that bring people a lot of pleasure if you're a chocolate lover. But it works on very, very intense neurochemical systems in the brain. And so you like playing a song again and again. You're motivated to repeat a song in a way that a student may not be motivated to like watch a lecture multiple times or read information online or in a book or in a handout multiple times. And so music incentivizes the learner to engage in this repetitive process. Repetition is the key to music. Repetition is the key to learning. And so music-based learning is a really great way of supporting that repetition. The other thing about music from the perspective of repetition is when music-based learning is done well in a relatively short wrapper, WRAPPER, right? Like music as a wrapper of information in about 3 to 4 minutes, sometimes even less. When music-based learning is done well, you can convey a lot of information in a very short amount of time, very efficiently and effectively. And so there again, when you talk about incentivization to repeat something and rehearse information, if I can listen to a song about 5 times in about 15 to 20 minutes, I've repeated all the information 5 times in a very efficient amount of time, versus if that information was just kind of taught to a student traditionally or written down on, again, a handout, a worksheet online, you couldn't repeat all that information that amount of times that efficiently. So those are just 2 reasons why music as a learning carrier, as a vessel of information and learning, really supports the rehearsal and repetition process, which is fundamental to successful learning. We'll go to the next slide. Okay, so now we sit here and say, well, this all seems to make a lot of sense. We've all experienced the power of music anecdotally. So then we have to go, well, why is it that use of music in learning is limited? Because when you look at how music is applied to the learning space, what you'll typically find is that music-based learning is usually limited to early childhood learning. And when music is used more broadly, after, let's say, kindergarten, first grade, when poof, music seems to disappear from formal education, when you see it being used, it's as a one-off novelty tool. And it's usually limited to rote memorization. So we all remember conjunction junction, I'm a bill on Capitol Hill, the 50 nifty United States, the periodic table. And I kind of call this musical Mad Libs because I feel like every single one of us has this experience where you go, when I was in fill in the blank grade, so whatever grade it was for you, my fill in the blank subject teacher, history, math, science, Spanish teacher played us a song on fill in the blank, and I remember it to this day. Like, we've all had that experience of that one teacher that played the song that we remember forever. And so we said, well, this is kind of peculiar. This works so well. But if you as an educator gets that and says, hey, I want to integrate music into the classroom, the burden is on you. The burden is on you. You either have to create songs yourself, or you have to scour the web and maybe you find like a one-off song on this topic and a one-off song on this topic. And when you do that, number one, it's a lot of work. Number two, you find those songs are variable production value and quality. And so, you know, when you're presenting something to a kid, you want it to be of a certain level of production that excites them. Not that they go, oh, this feels like a kid song or it feels kind of cheesy. And then you find that these videos could be a variable academic soundness, and good luck finding a series of videos that like iteratively correspond to your standards or the curriculum you're using, or really supplements all of the topics you're teaching comprehensively. So we asked, what's possible if, go to the next slide. What's possible if we could find a way to use music to harness learning, to create relevant sounding content, so stuff that sounds like what your students listen to electively, not like baby music, present information in a multimodal format. So the power of music is often in music videos, where there's an auditory component, there's a visual component, and a kinesthetic component. Visually, there are ways to use motion graphics and imagery in a video to reinforce the information being presented orally. And kinesthetically, if you have live action, real people singing and performing, they can engage in dance moves and motion that reinforces the information to be learned. And so you wind up with this very powerful synergistic process where you've got auditory, visual, and kinesthetic modalities all reinforcing the same information simultaneously. And I can tell you, we have students say they learn something, they're taking a test, they don't remember the information, they do the dance moves, and the information comes back to them. A very, very interesting student observation, but a very powerful way of conveying information. And we're going to show you some examples of that shortly as well. So we don't just leave it to your imagination. And so, you know, what's possible then when we use a medium like music that resonates with kids? Let's go back to what we were talking about before, capturing attention. And what if we can teach entire subjects this way and go beyond rote memorization? What if we can give you as educators just a plug and play, easy to use solution where all of your standards or all of the topics have a music-based correlate? And the results have been absolutely amazing. Next slide. So what does music-based learning look like, feel like, sound like, or what can it look like, feel like, sound like? We'd like to show you a couple of examples, starting with a video on graphing ordered pairs. So if anybody woke up today and you said, I'd really love to learn about graphing ordered pairs, today is your lucky day. We're going to teach you something about it.
Left and right, X, up and down, Y. Left and right, X, up and down, Y. Left and right, X, up and down, Y. Reference lines on which you rely. long name. It's called Cartesian coordinate plane. This coordinate plane comes to be when you draw the X and Y axis. Coordinate plane like an old school map. Two coordinates pinpoint exactly where you're at. In ordered pairs, comma Y in parentheses. Moves the point horizontally then vertically. X coordinate moves across left, right. Y moves up, down, unite. Coordinates supposed to show an exact position. You need to know the X, the Y when graph is the mission. Left and right, X up and down, Y. Left and right, X up and down, Y. Left and right, X up and down, Y. Reference lines on which you rely. X axis and Y axis make four quadrants, and in this you plot coordinates to find out where a point is. Using an ordered pair. To graph points, everything is relative to the origin. Think of it like a starting point where you should begin. On a 2D graph, 0, 0 are coordinates that mark the spot. Origin is where X and Y axes cross at the center of the plot. The X and Y value tell you how far away from the origin a specific point will lay. For each axis, the origin divides positive and negative coordinates on each side.
So that video is going to soon be available on the Musology YouTube channel, and I think Allison's going to post a link if any of you want to follow Musology on YouTube and have access to resources like that. I'd like to show you another example of music-based learning applied to health-related information, and so would like to share a video on a very, very topical subject, the coronavirus.
There's a new novel virus they call the corona. It's through the air, sticks to things like your phone. If you touch your face, your mouth, your nose, or your iris with the germs on your hands, you can get the virus.
Corona germs can live on surfaces of things. Tables, handles, countertops, car keys, and playground swings. If someone sick is next to you, they cough, spit, talk, or avoid you. These are other ways that you could get the sickness too.
Apart but we're together, alone but not forever. Stay at home, keep your distance for a while, 'cause this is all over the map, over the map. Hung high, five, or shaker, got a namaste. All over the place, over the place. Rub, scrub, wash your hands, stay at home, just in case.
If you do it for the gram, you could do it for the gram. Don't touch your face, wash your hands. If you do it for the gram, you could do it for your gram. Elbow, foot, tap, stay home, wash your hands.
If you do have the virus, you may not even know it. It could take a week or two for you to show it. That's the reason in this season you should have a little patience. So stay at home, 'cause anyone could be contagious.
Don't go to public places, stay away from the crowd, 'cause now is not the time that you should be going out. Feeling coughs and body aches, or feeling short of breath.
Corona's not the kind of thing you wanna catch.
Apart but we're together, alone but not forever. Stay at home, keep your distance for a while, 'cause this is all over the map, over the map. Hung high, five, or shaker, got a namaste. All over the place,
All over the place,
over the place.
all over the place.
Rub, scrub, wash your hands, stay at home, just in case.
This is how we wash our hands. Wet your hands with running water. Use some soap to lather. Wash the front and wash the back, and do it with some swagger. Clean your hands between your fingers and above your wrists. Fingertips and fingernails, you do the Turkish twist. Don't forget your thumbs, they important too. Count for 20 seconds, nothing less to do. You can pass the time by singing a tune like happy birthday to you. When your hands are nice and clean, don't touch the dirty towel. Use your elbow, arm, or
contracted, call up your doc.
Call up your doc. If you do it for the gram, you can do it for the gram. Don't be selfish, stay home with your fam. If you're young or you're old, listen up, understand. No cap, coronavirus is
All over the map.
Super. So I wanted to just give you a little bit of my background to explain how I personally got interested in innovative approaches to learning. It actually happened for me at quite a young age. When I was in 8th grade and 13 years old, I wound up doing my school science project on a learning technique called mind mapping. And it was mandatory that we did science projects every year. And I didn't know what to do my project on. And my dad said, hey, I have this book. I think it's really interesting and could give you an idea for your science project. And he left it on the kitchen table. And at 13, I wasn't going to touch anything my dad told me was interesting. But finally, out of desperation, I read this book because I still didn't know what to do my science project on. And that's when I learned about this technique called mind mapping, which is a visuospatial way of documenting, organizing, retaining information. And when I read the book, it was written by a British psychologist who had spoken about the applications of mind mapping in business and industry, which meant nothing to me as a 13-year-old. But the technique seemed intriguing to me. And so I wondered, well, could this be used by kids for the types of applications that made sense to us, which were, like, could I use this to take notes in class? Could I use it to prepare an essay? Could I use it to study for a test? And so what was fascinating about mind mapping is, if you can see above my head, that's kind of an example in that picture. That's an example of what a mind map looks like. But it's like a radial associative approach to documenting information. And if you look at how the brain works, the brain does not process information in sentences. Even if physiologically you look at how the brain is structured with neurons and synapses and connections, it's all associative. So a key word or a smell or an image of something triggers other associative information in the brain. And so what's fascinating about mind mapping is it was like learning with the brain as opposed to against the brain, and drew on a lot of mental areas such as color, imagery, the importance of using keywords versus long sentences. And it was also a mode of learning where there was meaning embedded in structure. So when you look at a mind map visually, there's information that's conveyed to you as a learner. How many key ideas do you have? What topic has the most information surrounding it? Versus when we learn using sentence type structures, every page of writing is indistinguishable in terms of the structure of the information. So I could do a whole presentation on mind mapping, which I'm not. I'm going to abridge this. But it's just to say this was this very fascinating learning method that I started to work with. Next slide. And so, why is there a koala bear on the screen? I wound up, based on my 8th grade science project, getting invited to present my research at a global education conference in Sydney, Australia. And in preparation for the conference, my dad told me, like, hey, when you speak in front of people, you put a handout together. And I was 13. I never had spoken in front of people. I said, Dad, that sounds kind of boring. Like, handouts kind of suck. So I'm going to instead write a little book on learning. And I know there's going to be all pretty much adults who attend the presentation, but I'm really trying to communicate this to other kids. So I wrote this book called Brain Power for Kids. And within 24 hours, I was all over the media in Australia, including on a show called The Ray Martin Show. You see him in front of that old school TV. And the reason Johnny Carson's on there is at the time when I said, who's Ray Martin? They said, he's the Johnny Carson of Australia. So if my feathered hair didn't date me in the previous slide, that certainly will. But within years, I was lecturing throughout high school. I was lecturing all over the world. I was going on Good Morning America, Good Morning South Africa, morning TV in Korea, in England. And it just goes to show how the world responded to a technique that connected with learners. And that's what we were talking about at the beginning of this Ed webinar, is the importance of using methods and techniques that connect with the learner. Next slide. So the other thing I learned working with mind mapping is the importance of active learning versus passive learning. Before mind mapping, I had the experience of like sitting in a class, taking notes out of a textbook, and 40 minutes later, looking down at pages and pages of notes and going, did I write that? Because I don't remember writing anything like that. Because for me, the process of note taking was I would daydream and just like copy my textbook in my own handwriting, in my own notebooks. And then I'd go back and study afterwards. And so that's passive learning. But what active learning does is it turns the whole model on its head. And when you create something like a mind map, when you're forced to figure out where information goes on the page and use imagery and use color, you can't daydream and create a mind map at the same time. And so what I started to see with a method like mind mapping is once you move from passive to active learning, everything changes for a learner, because then the process of note taking also becomes the process of learning. And now more so than ever, you see all those devices on the screen. We are competing for attention, students' attention. The importance of active learning can't be understated. Next slide. So I went on after doing my graduate work to moving to Manhattan and working in the music business. And I had the great fortune of working with some of these amazing artists you see on the screen. And really, that's when I had this eureka moment. I said, like, wait a second. There are people coming into our music studio. They're going to write a song. It's going to get played on the radio. People are going to hear that song again and again. And millions of people are going to know every single word to that song. So I suddenly, like, this eureka moment was like, music-based learning, the power of it is replicable. The magnitude of the effect is vast. You can hear a song that you haven't heard for decades and all the words come back to you. That's an unbelievable learning effect that we don't see in education typically. Systematically, once you study the neuroscience, you know why that effect is occurring. And so what I realized is when you look at passive to active learning, what happens with music-based learning is we move to what's called intra-active learning. We're just like inside the brain, almost without trying. If we were playing the same song on repeat during this whole presentation, even if you were listening to me and that was in the background, when you walked away from this, you'd probably start singing some of the words to that song without even trying. You learn through music. It's quite remarkable. And in remote learning environments, again, anything that has that type of learning power and engagement and connection with the learner is critical. Next slide, please. So I'm going to highlight some research really quickly. What you see on the screen now is data from over probably 10,000 students. And we have a structure set up that students take a pre-test before watching a music video, and then they can post-test after watching the video. What you see here is the mode. So the mode when students pre-test is a 40%. After watching a music video, an educational music video, the very first time they post-test, the very first time, the mode jumps to a perfect 100%. It's actually an astounding data point. Next slide. This is data from a randomized controlled trial that we conducted several years ago. A music-based learning condition and a control group saw the same talent present the information conversationally. What I'd like you to pay attention to here, which is so amazing, is that after a 7-day delay, you see retention in the control group almost go back to baseline measure, the initial baseline measure. When the student's teacher saw this, in reference to the control group, he's like, this is like I taught my students something last week, and this week they've already forgotten it. And what you see is the learning gains obtained in the music-based learning condition hold constant even after a 7-day delay. Again, the power of music. Next slide. Here's data that you can see from this. These are summer school students. Red is the pre-test, blue is the post-test. Again, it's a different way of looking at what we looked at 2 slides back. In this case, the pre-test mode was a 30%. And when students post-test right after watching a music video, that jumps to 100%. What is very notable here is that red distribution is a normal distribution with a little bit of a tail. We've been taught that every human trait and characteristic, from height to IQ, is characterized by a bell-shaped curve. When you look at what happens with music-based learning, we suddenly have a distribution that a statistician would never tell you characterizes a human trait or characteristic. So music-based learning actively defies our scientific understanding of how we think distributed traits and properties are supposed to work. Next slide. And then what we can see is this is summer school students. After 4 weeks of using Musology, you go from 0% of students passing a diagnostic pre-test on all of pre-algebra to over 1 in 10 students passing that. Next slide. So here, what music-based learning does is something pretty important. Student-centric approaches to learning, we got to teach students in a way that connects with them and they feel is relevant. But teacher-centric approaches to learning are also important, giving you tools that make you excited and passionate about what you're doing with your students. And I think with music-based learning, we hit on something called cognitive emotional learning. We've all heard about social emotional learning. What's cognitive emotional learning? That's that video you saw at the very beginning of the presentation. When that young man experienced success cognitively, you had this whole cascade emotionally of self-confidence and pride and efficacy. And so what I'd like to suggest is a path to this type of emotional learning is giving a student tools to experience cognitive success. Next slide. So how can you integrate music into your instruction? Well, one way is to use popular music that relates to the information that you're teaching. And that music can relate to it lyrically, stylistically, or even in the case of a music video, visually. Sometimes music can also be a conversation starter. So when talking about a song or a video, you can stimulate conversation that gets your class super excited. You can encourage students to write their own poems or songs about a topic you're teaching. You can challenge them to rewrite the lyrics to their favorite songs. You can ask students to create TikTok or other videos to convey the educational content you're using. And then you can utilize any of the music-based resources that are out there to supplement your standards and curriculum. Next slide. So directed learning is super important. How do students, we have like custom playlists and assignments, which we use on our platform. So as soon as a student logs in, what's on their front page, front of mind is what you want them to learn in remote learning environments. It's so important that your students immediately know what you want them to focus on. A platform like Musology supports self-paced and self-directed learning, which is again so important during remote learning scenarios. Next slide. There's a 3-step method we use for learner engagement. Students answer warm-up questions to unlock a music video. This primes learning, activates pre-existing knowledge, and provides a baseline measure of what the student knows. Then the trick is, how do you then give that student high engagement content, such as music-based learning, to teach the information? It's important that they're encouraged to repeat that high engagement content. And then we have a system, a challenge system. We don't call quizzes quizzes, we call them challenges. So students can test themselves and their learning growth. They learn persistence, and this is gamified as well, which students really love. Next slide. This is just some of the really great feedback we've gotten from students. I love that last quote. Musology has not just given me confidence in my ability to do math, it's given me confidence in my ability to do anything. Next slide. And so we would like to thank EdWeb for allowing Musology to sponsor this Ed webinar today. We'd like to show you a brief video of Musology in action. You can try Musology free at musology.com, and then we will be handing over to the wonderful Chris Blue.
While many students today struggle with learning and find schoolwork boring, these same students know the words to countless pop songs. So we created Musology. Musology is a digital learning platform that uses music videos to teach curriculum and make learning fun. Musology is a gamified experience that works using 3 simple steps. First, answer the math trivia to unlock a music video. Next, watch the music video as many times as you need. Finally, take the math challenges to earn achievements and awards.
Musology is like in a song and it's groovy and it sticks to your head.
I think the music in the videos helps the kids relate to it.
The space where you graph points has a long name. It's called Cartesian coordinate plane. This coordinate plane comes to be when you draw the X and Y axis. Identify the variable and then do the opposite for both sides of the equal sign.
Developed by a team of hit songwriters, PhDs, and learning experts, Musology is a comprehensive learning system with proven results.
Music activates every neural system and subsystem identified by neuroscientists. Music lights up the brain.
Compared to other teaching methods, I've seen a higher level of engagement from more kids than with anything else I've used.
There's a catchy beat, a rhythm to it. They love that. It's academically sound. A hand motion may be enough to help them remember what they're supposed to do.
I'll just be in the middle of class and I'll be doing a test. I'll be like, I can't remember. But then I do the dance and I'm like, okay, I remember.
As superintendent, you hear lots of trendy things. People are always trying to sell you some new gimmick or some new way to learn, most of which don't pan out. Every now and then, one actually does work. And this one did.
When we found Musology, everybody went up a few letter grades and we were all really happy about it.
I see so much excitement in these kids because they can now make 100 on a quiz.
I think it's very cool that in 4 minutes you can learn what's usually taught in 1 or 2 weeks in class. It's so easy to comprehend, and I wish that it had always been like that. I probably would have got straight A's.
How did you learn your ABCs? Probably in a song if you're just like me. Turns out you can learn in a breeze, just like that with Musology. Learn anything with music, videos, and songs. Activate your brain so your attention stays strong. Answer correct, I love that. Acing the test, I love that. Learning success, I love that. Being my best, I love that. How did you learn your ABCs? Probably in a song if you're just like me. Turns out you can learn in a breeze, just like that with Musology.
Sometimes I wouldn't do so good on my math test, but now that I got Musology, I can feel the rhythm.